Now what I'll do is reset 3ds Max by going File, Reset. And I'm not going to save this scene. I am going to reset it though. And down in the bottom right hand corner, I'm going to maximize my viewport and create a simple box primitive just by dragging it out, left clicking, and creating the box. Now with this box selected, I'm going to go ahead and right click and turn it into an editable poly rather than leaving it as a basic primitive. Now I can toggle the wireframe mode by pressing F4 and showing that on and off. And what I want to do is apply the Unwrap UVW modifier to it and sort of show you what the UVs would look like without having done any UVW unwrapping. As you'll notice, if we alter the colors here just a little bit to make things a little easier to see, I'm going to make a material, a very simple gray material, and apply that instead of the red color here. Because what I want to do is I want to highlight and select these faces so that you can see that they are red, and the color inside the UV has all of these faces on top of one another. Now we typically call this overlapped UVs or stacking your UVs. And when you make a box and you start off with without doing anything to it, they're already automatically all piled right on top of one another. So what we would want to do is, instead of leaving them all piled on top of each other, is if we wanted to be able to create our numbered box example like I did earlier, is we want to have each of the faces separated and not stacked. Otherwise, all of them would have the same number or whatever texture is that we paint on top of them, because all of the UVs would be the same. So we can actually very easily put all of the UVs back into the box by clicking on the Pack Normalize button. And this will actually do two things. It will move the UVs back into the box where they need to be, and it will normalize them. And we'll talk a little bit about what normalization means in just a bit. But the long and short of it is that if you have a set of UVs that are different sized and you want the size to closer match the actual scale of the 3D object, Pack Normalize will get all of them back to that specific state. So let's rewind just a minute and talk a little bit more about the UI and the interface in case you're completely new, and some basics about how to sort of navigate what you need here inside the Unwrap window. Now, if you have a 3ds object here and you have applied an Unwrap UVW, it's very common that the window does not pop up. You may actually be looking at something like this and you're wondering, where did the window go? What you want to do is you would want to actually click on this button that says Open UV Editor. And once you've clicked on that, that will actually pop it up. It's right over here down at the bottom. So scroll down, click on Open UV Editor, and this will open it up. By default in 3ds Max, that does not actually open up. Your window may also be kind of flopped around somewhere you don't like. It may be a different size that you don't like. So one thing I always do is I get the scale that I want it to be. I'll also toggle the checkerboard on and off. Personally, I like to keep the checkerboard off, and so I'll turn that off for now. And I will also click on Options, always bring up the edit window. What this will do is every time I apply an Unwrap UVW, it will automatically bring the window up. Because as you notice, by default, like I said, it doesn't normally do this, but I've turned this on. And once I have some settings that I'm happy with and I want to make sure that I keep, I'll always come back and press Save Current Settings as default. Now this is just sort of some of the basics about saving and keeping your settings as they are. Yours don't have to look like mine. You can always move this window off to another screen if it makes things faster for you, or however it is, it's going to make your life easier. Now the basics of working inside the UVW Unwrap window here are pretty basic and easy to get a hold of and understand. What you want to do is use the middle mouse button wheel to scroll in and out. You're going to hold down the middle mouse button, grabbing the UVs and kind of moving the UV canvas. You can hold down the left mouse button and drag select. Over here on the right hand side, you'll notice that you have a lot of buttons and a lot of features. Now, we're not going to cover every single thing in here. I think that a lot of times for games and basic asset UV unwrapping, there's only a small handful of tools that can really get you through most of what you need to know. So don't be too intimidated by all of the different buttons that we see, but I will cover some of the major, most important ones. One of the most important things that you can also do to really improve your UVW unwrapping is to get used to some of the hotkeys. Some of the basic ones specifically are the vertex mode, the edge mode, the polygon or face mode, and element mode. And so if you press 1, you'll automatically go into vert mode. 2 will be edges, and 3 will be polygons. Now you'll need to set up a specific hotkey for element mode to be able to toggle that on and off. And that's going to be very important when we start attaching some of these UVs together, because you're going to want to be able to grab large sections of them all at once. And we'll talk a little bit about setting up some hotkeys in just a bit. The basic stuff that you see here along the top are going to be the move, the rotate, and scale. So if you grab a polygon and you want to move it around, you want to make sure that you're in move mode, and then rotate and scale. And this is going to be the same as it normally would be inside of 3D modeling. For example, you would press R for scale, E to be able to rotate, and W to be able to move. But getting used to those hotkeys is really going to help speed up your workflow here. There's also this other feature called the Freeform Mode, and what it does is if you turn it on once you have a UV piece selected, is it sort of gives you the ability to do all of the things at once, to include scale, move, and rotate. It just depends on where you hover your mouse around to. If you hover it around the sides, you'll see the icon changes into sort of a rotate, and near the corners you are able to scale up and down sort of non-uniformly. Now, if you want to scale uniformly, all you have to do is hold down the control key while you're scaling, and this will allow you to uniformly scale, meaning that everything's going to move together at the same time. If you don't hold down the control button, you're pretty much going to just get a loose sort of version of it. One thing that's also important to remember when working with UVs is it's very common that sometimes your UVs will not work properly. And the way that you want to ensure that your hotkeys are working is to ensure that you've clicked this shortcut override toggle. What this feature is about is it's supposed to give you the ability to switch up similar hotkeys, whether when you're using modifiers or if you're in edit poly mode, as opposed to when it is not. So you might have some hotkeys that you may use or may set up that suddenly don't work once you've applied that Unwrap UVW. If that is the case, turn this shortcut override on, and you should notice that your hotkeys are going to work, like the ones that I'm mentioning now, such as move, rotate, scale. So that's sort of the basic gist of some of the general movements and navigation. We also have some other features up here in the top right that are very handy. Let's say that you had a UV that was sort of an elongated triangle here, and you wanted to rotate this UV very quickly and easily. That's what these functions are here. These will allow you to rotate and sort of spin your UVs. We'll talk a bit more about some of the alignment tools and what some of these other features are down here. Down at the bottom, if you scroll down to arrange elements like we talked about earlier, there's the ability to pack normalize that more or less takes all of your UVs and puts them back inside the square. And you can adjust the padding amount, and what this basically means is, you know, how much of a gap there's going to be between your UVs when you do this. And so if you increase this a lot higher and you do a pack normalize again, it's going to give your UVs a lot more space. Now, this is not necessarily what you probably want. You probably want your UVs to be relatively close and tight to one another. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's important in just a bit, but it is important that I show you where this feature is. You can also have UVs that are more or less sort of stretched, or, you know, different angles, because it's not always going to be a bunch of boxes. And what you might want to do is turn on this rotate feature, and rotate will actually continue to kind of twist and turn your UVs in an effort to give it the most efficient pack possible. So while the most efficient pack for this may not be straight up and down, whenever I do this, if it decides, you know, having this rotated makes more sense, then it's going to assist with that. Sometimes you don't want your UVs to be rotated. You want them to stay in a certain direction to make your life a little bit easier when you are unwrapping and texturing. So you may or may not decide you want to use this rotate tool.